My name is Mike Harper, and I've been a park ranger for the past 20 years. The woods have always been my second home, a place of peace and solitude where I could lose myself in the sounds of nature. But in all my years patrolling these forests, I had never encountered anything like what I was about to face. It started on a quiet evening, just like any other. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees as I set out on my nightly patrol. The air was crisp, the smell of pine and earth filling my lungs as I made my way down the familiar trails. I knew these woods like the back of my hand, every path, every rock, every tree. But as I rounded a bend in the trail, something caught my eye. There, carved into the bark of an old oak tree, was a strange symbol. It was a circle with lines radiating out from the center, almost like a sun, but with jagged edges that seemed to twist and writhe. It wasn't something I'd ever seen before, and it didn't look like the work of any hiker or camper. I ran my fingers over the carving, feeling the rough edges of the cuts. It was fresh, recently made, maybe within the last few days, but who would carve something like this in the middle of the woods? And why? I made a note of the location in my logbook, planning to report it when I got back to the station. But as I continued my patrol, I couldn't shake the image of that symbol from my mind. There was something unsettling about it, something that made my skin crawl. Over the next few nights, I began to notice more of the symbols. They were always carved into the trees, sometimes high up on the trunks, other times near the ground. But they were never in the same place twice, and they seemed to form a trail leading deeper and deeper into the forest. The symbols varied in design. Some were simple circles or triangles, while others were more complex, with intricate patterns and strange, twisting shapes. But they all had the same jagged edges, the same sense of something dark and unnatural. I couldn't help but feel that the symbols were leading me somewhere, guiding me along a path that I wasn't sure I wanted to follow. But my curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what was going on, who was carving these symbols, and why. One night, I decided to follow the trail. I left the main path and ventured into the dense underbrush, my flashlight cutting through the darkness as I searched for the next symbol. The woods were eerily silent, the only sound the crunch of leaves under my boots and the distant hoot of an owl. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees grew taller and thicker, their branches intertwining above my head, blocking out the moonlight. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and the symbols became more frequent, more elaborate. I had a growing sense of unease, but I pushed it aside. I was a park ranger. I had faced down wild animals, rescued lost hikers, and weathered countless storms. I wasn't going to let a few strange carvings scare me off. But as I pressed on, I began to notice something else. The symbols weren't just random carvings, they were part of a pattern, a map that was leading me somewhere. And whatever it was deep in the heart of the forest, far from any trail or campsite. After what felt like hours of trekking through the dense underbrush, I finally emerged into a small clearing. The trees parted, revealing a circular space bathed in moonlight. The grass was tall and wild, and in the center of the clearing stood a large, ancient stone, covered in the same strange symbols I had been following. I approached the stone cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The symbols were larger here, more detailed, and there was something about them that made my stomach churn. They seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if they were alive. As I studied the stone, I noticed something else. There were remnants of old candles scattered around the base, their wax melted into the earth. The ground was disturbed, as if something had been buried or dug up recently. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of ritual site? Had someone been performing strange ceremonies out here in the middle of the woods? And if so, what were they trying to accomplish? I didn't have time to ponder these questions for long. As I stood there, a faint sound reached my ears, the distant murmur of voices. They were low and indistinct, but they were growing louder, coming closer. I quickly extinguished my flashlight and crouched behind the stone, my heart racing. The voices grew louder, and soon I could make out the figures of people entering the clearing, their forms shrouded in darkness. There were at least a dozen of them, all dressed in long, dark robes that seemed to blend into the shadows. They moved in silence, forming a circle around the stone, their faces hidden beneath hoods. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure with an air of authority, and began to speak in a low, rhythmic chant. The chanting filled the clearing, a strange melodic language that I didn't recognize. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, and it sent a chill down my spine. The other figures joined in, their voices rising and falling in unison, creating an eerie, almost hypnotic effect. As the chanting continued, the leader of the group reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a small, ornate knife. It glinted in the moonlight as he raised it above his head, and I could see the blade was engraved with the same symbols that were carved into the stone. He turned to face the stone, his voice rising in pitch as he began to carve new symbols into the ancient surface. The others watched in silence, their heads bowed as if in prayer. I knew I should have turned and run back to the safety of the station, but I was frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. I had stumbled upon something dark, something forbidden, and I was certain that if they found me, I wouldn't make it out of the woods alive. The leader finished carving the symbols and stepped back, raising his arms to the sky. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and the air around me seemed to vibrate with an unseen force. Then, without warning, the ground beneath the stone began to tremble. The earth shook, and the stone seemed to pulse with a dark light, the symbols glowing with an eerie, otherworldly energy. A low, guttural sound emerged from the ground, a deep rumble that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. The figures in the clearing fell to their knees, their voices rising in a fevered pitch as they continued their chant. I could feel the power in the air, the darkness that was seeping out of the earth, and I knew that whatever they were doing, it wasn't just a ritual, it was a summoning. My instinct for survival finally kicked in. I knew I had to get out of there, to warn anyone about what was happening in these woods. But as I turned to leave, I stepped on a dry branch, and the loud snap echoed through the clearing. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the figures turned as one to face me, their hooded faces hidden in shadow. The leader stepped forward, his knife still in hand, and pointed it in my direction. "Who is there?" he demanded, his voice cold and commanding. I didn't wait to find out what they would do if they caught me. I bolted, sprinting back through the woods as fast as I could. The branches tore at my clothes, the darkness making it hard to see, but I didn't dare stop. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps pounding through the underbrush as they gave chase. My heart raced, and I pushed myself harder, desperate to put as much distance between us as possible. But they were fast, too fast. I could hear them gaining on me, their breaths heavy and labored. I could feel their eyes on my back, their intent clear. They weren't going to let me leave the forest alive. I stumbled, nearly falling as I caught my foot on a root, but I managed to catch myself and keep running. The trees seemed to close in around me, the darkness growing thicker, and I knew I was running out of time. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I saw a faint light through the trees, the glow of the ranger station in the distance. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning as I sprinted toward it. The station was small, just a one-room cabin with a radio and a few supplies, but it was my only hope. If I could reach it, I might be able to call for help, to get someone to come and rescue me before it was too late. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me and locking it. My chest heaved as I gasped for breath, my mind racing. I grabbed the radio and frantically tried to call for help, but all I got was static. Panic set in as I realized the radio wasn't working. I was alone, trapped in the middle of the woods with a group of people who wanted me dead. I could hear them outside, their voices low and menacing as they surrounded the cabin. They were speaking in that strange language again, their words a dark chant that seemed to seep into my mind. The door rattled as they tried to force it open, and I knew I didn't have much time. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and held it like a weapon, ready to fight if they managed to break in. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The chanting ceased, and the voices outside fell silent. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing. The woods were quiet again, the only sound the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Cautiously, I approached the window and peered outside. There was no one there. The clearing was empty, the dark figures gone. But I knew they were still out there watching, waiting for me to make a move, and I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin forever. I had to find a way out of the woods to get to safety before they found me again. But the path back to the main road was long and treacherous, and I didn't know if I could make it on my own. The night dragged on, the minutes feeling like hours as I sat huddled in the cabin, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had witnessed. Who were those people? What were they doing in the woods? And what had they summoned from the earth? As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't stay in the cabin forever, and the longer I waited, the more dangerous it became. They knew I was there, and they wouldn't stop until they had silenced me. I gathered my courage and stepped outside, the morning air cool against my skin. The woods were eerily quiet, the silence almost oppressive. There was no sign of the figures, no tracks or disturbances to indicate they had ever been there. But as I made my way back to the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that they were still out there, hidden among the trees. It took me hours to reach the ranger station, and by the time I arrived, I was exhausted both physically and mentally. My colleagues greeted me with concern, noting my disheveled appearance and the look of fear in my eyes. I told them everything about the symbols, the ritual, the dark figures in the woods, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just stress, that I was overworked and had let my imagination get the best of me. But I knew the truth. I had seen something that night, something dark and evil, and I knew that the woods were no longer safe. Weeks passed, and life at the station returned to normal. But I couldn't forget what I had seen, couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I avoided the trails where I had found the symbols, kept my patrols to the main paths, and tried to put it all behind me. But the symbols began to appear again, this time closer to the station. I found them carved into trees near the main road, hidden among the underbrush where only someone who knew what to look for would find them. And I knew then that they hadn't forgotten me. The cult, or whatever they were, had marked me and they were coming for me. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't just sit back and wait for them to strike. I had to confront them, to put an end to whatever dark rituals they were performing in the woods. Armed with my flashlight, a knife, and the determination to survive, I set out one last time into the forest. The symbols led me back to the clearing, where the stone still stood, now covered in even more carvings. I waited in the shadows, hidden among the trees, until nightfall. And then as the moon rose high in the sky, I heard them the same low voices, the same rhythmic chant, as the dark figures emerged from the woods and gathered around the stone. This time I didn't wait. I burst from my hiding place, charging into the clearing with my flashlight held high. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the faces of the cult members, their eyes wide with surprise and fear. The leader stepped forward, his knife raised, but I didn't give him a chance. I tackled him to the ground, knocking the blade from his hand and pinning him beneath me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "What are you doing out here?" But the man just smiled, a cold, sinister grin that sent a chill down my spine. "You cannot stop us," he said, his voice a low hiss. "The ritual has already begun. The darkness has been awakened, and it will consume everything before I could react." The other cult members closed in, dragging me off their leader and holding me down. I struggled, but they were too strong, their hands cold and unyielding as they pinned me to the ground. The leader stood, brushing off his robe, and retrieved his knife. He stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. "You should not have interfered," he said. "Now you will be our final sacrifice." As the leader raised the knife, a low rumble shook the ground beneath us. The earth trembled, the trees swayed, and the stone in the center of the clearing began to glow with that same dark, pulsating light. The cult members chanted louder, their voices rising to a fevered pitch as the ground cracked open beneath the stone, revealing a deep, yawning abyss. A foul, acrid smell filled the air, and from the darkness below, something began to emerge. It was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen, a twisted, grotesque form that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Its skin was black as night, covered in jagged, spiked scales that glistened in the moonlight. Its eyes were pits of darkness, empty and soulless, and its mouth was filled with rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. The cult members fell to their knees, bowing before the creature as it rose from the abyss, its massive form towering over the clearing. The leader approached it, holding the knife aloft as he chanted in that strange, twisted language. I could feel the darkness closing in around me, the air thick with malice and dread. I knew I was going to die sacrificed to whatever dark force these people had unleashed. But as the leader drew closer to the creature, something changed. The dark light that pulsed from the stone began to flicker, the glow fading in and out, as if struggling to maintain its power. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, and for the first time I saw something in its eyes fear. The leader hesitated, his chanting faltering as he noticed the change, and in that moment of uncertainty, I saw my chance. I fought against the cult members holding me down, kicking and struggling with all my might. One of them loosened his grip, and I broke free, lunging for the leader and knocking him to the ground. The knife flew from his hand, landing a few feet away. I scrambled for it, grabbing the handle and turning to face the creature. The dark light flickered again, and the creature let out a roar of anger, its massive form trembling as if it was struggling to maintain its hold on the physical world. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. With all my strength, I drove the knife into the stone, shattering the symbols carved into its surface. There was a blinding flash of light, and the ground beneath us erupted in a burst of energy. The cult members screamed as the darkness was ripped apart, the creature letting out a final, ear-piercing roar as it was pulled back into the abyss. The stone shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the ground closed up, sealing the creature away once more. The cult members collapsed, their bodies lifeless as the darkness was vanquished. I was left standing alone in the clearing, the knife still clutched in my hand, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The night was silent once more, the air still and cold. It took me hours to make it back to the ranger station, my body aching from the struggle, my mind reeling from what I had witnessed. When I finally arrived, I collapsed on the floor, too exhausted to move. My colleagues found me the next morning, and once again I tried to explain what had happened, but this time they didn't just dismiss me. The evidence was undeniable: the shattered stone, the dead bodies in the clearing, the strange symbols carved into the trees. The authorities were called in, and the area was cordoned off. But the official report said little. They couldn't explain what had happened, couldn't make sense of the strange events that had unfolded in those woods. The cult was never identified, their motives never fully understood. The symbols were studied by experts, but no one could decipher their meaning. The clearing was left untouched, a silent reminder of the darkness that had once dwelled there. As for me, I couldn't stay. The woods that I had once called home were now a place of nightmares, haunted by memories of that night. I resigned from my position as a park ranger and moved far away, trying to leave it all behind. But the memories lingered, the darkness always just at the edge of my mind. And sometimes in the quiet of the night, I could still hear the chanting, still see the flickering dark light, and feel the weight of the knife in my hand as I fought to survive. And I knew that the darkness was never truly gone. it was still out there, waiting, watching, ready to rise again. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.